My name is James. I'll be moderating the talk. Welcome to our talk tonight, The Eyes of Bees with Joe Dlugo. Joe's early fascination with the dramatic lines of aircraft gradually grew into an interest in living things that fly. His work, teaching students who are blind or have low vision, is a field centered on a detailed understanding of those implications on vision. Exploring bee vision is a continuation of that same curiosity, because understanding how bees see is as important an element in stewarding a world where they can thrive. In this presentation, Joe uses ultra close-up photography to explore these details and see how structures shape their perception. Without further ado, Joe, take it away.
Hey, thanks, James.
Yeah.
And, thank you, everybody. I just received word that I was reelected to the board. And my opponent called and conceded, and what a good race it was. Uh, all right,
Congratulations,
so I'm.
Joe.
Oh, thanks, James. Yeah. Okay, so welcome. This is the Eyes of Bees. This is my intro slide. I got a nice peek at those beautifully horizontally spread out compound eyes of a Anthophyra urbana. It's a digger bee. Maybe it's called the urban digger bee. I don't know what its common name is, but they live throughout Washington, and I have them here in my garden in Tenino in June and July. They're just fuzzy little fun ones. All right, so I was going to wear this sweater tonight because I know what season it is. It says, "Oh, Christmas bee buzzing with joy." The sweater did not come in the mail fast enough, but I figured, I was gonna put a promo out for whoever makes this because there's one for you. "Oh, Christmas bee buzzing with joy." I'm going to talk about who I am to talk about bees. James talked about it a little bit. I'm not really any kind of ologist. I always like to give that disclaimer before I talk to a group of science minded people because I somehow landed here. I am not really very science minded. So I apologize to you. My words might not be as advanced as you're used to hearing on these types of presentations. But my day job is a teacher of blind and low vision students. As you can imagine, like James was talking about, that I spend a lot of time thinking about vision and thinking about how other people see. And so I thought this was a kind of a nice thing to do to teach me how bees see. And plus, Lisa Robinson told me I needed to do it. And when Lisa Robinson tells you something, you don't say no. Um, so here I am, about 8 or 9 months later, after I sent her a close-up picture of a bee eye, and she says, "You're presenting," and then she's like, "When do you want to present? What month?" And I was like, "December, the last month of the year." So I have lots of time to prepare for this. I'm also a co-founder of Washington Native Bee Society. I really like to garden, and I like thinking about eyes and light and lenses and perspective and stuff. So, why is it good to look at bee eyes? Well, I'll tell you my story. Way back when it was the late '90s, maybe the early 2000s, I went to Borders Books and Music in Oak Brook, Illinois, and I got this book, The Art of Nature Photography, and it kind of launched my whole nature photography career, I guess, interest. It's by Niall Benby. He's a Scottish photographer. It's a really great book. It's probably a little dated right now, but he probably didn't coin this one phrase, but he said it in the book, and it's always stuck with me. And it's this kind of rule about wildlife photography, or just like any photography of any living thing, really. It's always keep the eyes in focus. And so I think about that quote all the time when I'm working with my camera. Always keep the eyes in focus. And why would we want to keep the eyes in focus? Because they're captivating, they're colorful, and they're complex. How do you like that for an alliteration? And eyes are the means by which many creatures gain large amounts of their sensory information, including us as humans. We get about 70 to 90% of our sensory information from our eyes. So it's a real critical sense. So it's also kind of exciting to exercise our perspective taking skills and put ourselves in the shoes or in the eyes of another creature or person, and try to imagine. It's one of the neat things about being human is what we can do, that we can kind of imagine what it's like, and we can use our tests and science to make educated guesses. And those educated guesses can help influence our bee habitat design. I'm spending a lot of time in my garden trying to design optimal bee habitats. So things like grouping flowers and adding color markers on bee hotels and stuff like that can actually help bees out. And then, of course, bee eyes are just really simply beautiful. And maybe that's really all I need to say, because I think they're cool looking and I like to look at them. Here's a carpenter bee. This is Xylocopa taverniformis. They're a bee that lives in from kind of like southern Oregon on down through California and a lot of the West. This is a male with beautiful big green eyes. These are huge for a bee. And if you are looking really closely at those eyes, let's get this out of the way. Yes, those are eyes. Those are the ocelli. Those are three simple eyes, and then there's the two compound eyes for that carpenter bee. All right, we'll talk way more about that. We'll really get into the weeds about that in just a little bit. All right, so here is, speaking of beauty of bee eyes, I just want to show you one of the most beautiful bee eyes in the business. This is Agapostemon virescens, the male, and it has that nice, even dark green eye with that dark grayish patterning in it. Um, I just love these. So simply beautiful. And they're very intriguing. Like, this is one of the smallest bee eyes you can find. This is a fairy bee, Perdita nevadensis, out here in Western Washington, one of the few Perdita we get. And to think of how small this creature is, it's almost unfathomably small for a bee, especially if you're new to bees. You're like, that a bee can't be that small. And, I mean, its head isn't even a millimeter long. So this is photographed with an extremely high-powered microscopic lens. And it's actually probably 130 photos put together, but you can see that depth of field, if you're into macro photography, you can see that antenna that's pointing towards the camera just disappearing there. That's how thin the depth of field is. And also, bee eyes are kind of like charismatic and fun, and cute. Like, this is Megachile rotundata, the alfalfa leaf cutter bee, and they just have these absolutely endearing eyes. And I've said it here every time I talk about them. I say that the plush toy industry needs to discover them. They're just so wonderful. And those big eyes really make them look great. All right. So, in my career, in my life of looking at eyes, I've kind of discovered that there's three ways to look at them. They provide a framework for us. We can look at eyes, where we just look at eyes. This is great, but that's really only kind of surface level, but a lot of fun. We can crunch the numbers and we can get the stats. And that's a little bit like going to the optometrist, where you go and you sit down and they take a bunch of tests and they say a bunch of numbers. You may or may not get an explanation for what they're talking about. You take whatever piece of paper they give you and then go get eyeglasses from it. And that's that. It's a very clinical way of looking at things. Or we can take a look at things functionally. So, how does the system work in the real world? And that's really like my job when I work with students. I get white lab coat numbers that come in to me, and I have to make sense of those for everybody. And then I look at that testing and I do a ton of my own testing on top of it. So I look at so many different things. I look at like visual acuity, or sharpness is a better way to say it to a layperson. What are the visual fields? How much does somebody see? Sensitivity of brightness to dim, sensitivity to bright or to dim light, sensitivity to contrast, color vision, depth perception, visual tracking, visual processing, ocular motor skills. So there's just tons of things that you can look at with vision to understand really, what does all those numbers you get from the doctor actually mean when they're put into play. We'll be looking at all three of those methods. I'll be putting some pictures up. I'll be giving you some numbers, and I'll be giving you some explanations about bees and how they see. All right. So to begin any conversation about vision, we need to kind of get a grounding in how vision works. It is actually a system. It is not just our eyes. So here I have this kind of flow chart of a subject. On the left is a bee, and it's reflecting light into a human eye, or the cross section of a human eye. And there's muscles around the human eye that keep it stable and allow it to aim and all. And then that information that the eye gathers is shipped through something called the optic nerve. That's a really horrible picture of an optic nerve. It doesn't look anything like it. It's just what came up in the icons in Apple Keynote for nerve. So I dropped it in there. And so, anyways, the nerve is the pathway that then takes all that visual information to the brain, and the brain processes that information. So vision is is really, you know, it's a complicated flow. And the best way to analogize that really that I've found is to think about like digital videography. You so yeah, on the bottom, the eye equates to a video camera. The muscles equate to a tripod of that video camera. The optic nerve is like a cable, a USB cable that's shipping that visual information to the computer and the processor, which is equivocates the brain. All right, so that's the human system. The bee system's not all too much different. The bee has those five eyes, like we talked about with that carpenter bee picture. By the way, this is the western leafcutter bee, a female, Megachile paraherta. And so she's got five eyes. Two of them are kind of concealed by hair. Isn't it interesting that that center ocelli, the simple eye on the top, doesn't have a whole lot of hair around it? You know, it's kind of a nice design feature if you don't want hair in your eyes. Um, so the video camera is this eyes, and here I'm going to superimpose a brain onto our Western leafcutter bee. And this brain actually was drawn by my daughter, Lillian, who is an aspiring biological illustrator. And she saved me when I couldn't find a bee brain image on Wikimedia Commons. She drew one for me. I told her, "You're probably the only kid at your school who's ever drawn a bee brain." And she said, "Dad, I'm probably the only kid in the world who's ever drawn a bee brain." So there you have it. There's her bee brain. So the reason why I'm showing the brain is because I'm talking about the optic nerve. There's the image of the cable there, and the optic nerve. Neural networks are labeled the neural networks. There's two different networks. There's one for the ocelli, and there's one for the compound eyes. And uh, and here I'm labeling the processing centers of the brain. So you have the medulla, which is the larger yellow, the thicker yellow part that processes the images coming from the compound eye. And then the arrow pointing from the microchip over to the central brain, which processes what's coming from the ocelli. So there's everything marked. And notice how there's no muscles involved in this. The human eye has muscles around them. Bee eyes do not have muscles around them. They are fixed in place. Bees instead have a neck. Not much aiming going on there. All right, but so well, there's some similarities with how our visual systems work, at least in the flow part. But that's kind of where it ends. We have very different equipment. Equipment for humans. We are a terrestrial creature. We're social. We're slow and methodical, relatively slow and methodical. We need long distance awareness. We need to be able to see far. We need sharp central vision so that we can manipulate tools and read. We need rich color perception. I've read, I don't know how true this is, but it's for detecting ripe fruit. And that's what they believe it evolved for. And, you know, that color vision certainly works for that. And also, we need to recognize faces. You know, we're a social creature, and a lot of language occurs not only in how we speak, but also our bodies, our eyebrows, our eyes. Yeah, we're very expressive. So bees are a creature that, yeah, very, very different from us. They're airborne. They move really fast. They look for flowers. They need wide angle awareness to stay safe. They need to be able to detect motion very rapidly. They need extended color vision to pick up markings on flowers. And they also need some advanced systems to navigate. So let's get into all these aspects of a bee's life and take a look at how they equip themselves visually for that. All right, so bees are airborne and they're fast moving. And here I got some AI slop for you, folks. This is from Google Gemini. I always had this dream to like fly a bee. And so there's the two pilots sitting in a cockpit with windows that are represent where the eyes are on a bee. And anyways, it looks like it'd probably be a lot of fun until you try it. The way they move is probably not something that's gonna sit well with anybody's stomach. However, you know, it, it's interesting when you look in a cockpit. If there's any place that tells you like humans are not designed for flight, it's looking in the cockpit of an aircraft because there's so many sophisticated instruments in there that are trying to pick up the senses we don't have to fly, and so bees they're made to fly, and almost no bee is made to fly more than this nomada. I just want to show this randomly because, man, it just looks really cool. I think like an Italian sports car company designed this bee. Um, and they live right out here, right in Washington State. And they have really cool eyes. If you look closely at those blue eyes that they have, they're actually kind of purple when you look up close. But here's that image of that same bee with that eye, that compound eye. See, notice that purple sheen in the front, kind of fading into like a dusky blue in the back. Yeah. I wish I knew what species that was. It seems like it would be one that's kind of easy to identify down the species level. All right. So, what kind of vision does it require to be airborne? So, you need fast flicker fusion frequencies. Love saying that. That's really a fancy way of saying when flickering light appears as non flickering light. So, bees, their eyes take in like 200 to 300 hertz or 200 to 300 frames per second, whereas humans take in like around 50, 60, 70, 80 frames a second, depending on who it is. That's why when we take videos, a lot of times they're 60 frames a second. Humans can really blend frames together, like cinema is at 24 frames per second, and we could still see that smoothly. But bees can see things like, I mean, yeah, super hyper smoothly. Um, Bees also need landmark identification and they need excellent visual memory. They need to know which way is up so that they could fly. All right, so let's talk about flicker fusion frequency. Flicker fusion frequency. If you are ever staring at a bee making a flight through flowers, it can look like it's something of an extraordinary task. And so this is my simulation of what that might be like to a bee. Oh my. Oh, it's going through the Clarkia emoena at like really, really high speeds. And if you like Clarkia emoena planted in profusion, it's like early July, wonderful goodness in a garden and attracts tons of bees. Okay, I'm sure you've all had enough of that. So that's kind of what it appears like. It seems like warp speed in Star Wars, the Millennium Falcon, and you got the straight lines beginning because you're going so fast. It's so hard to really comprehend any of that information, at least as we see a bee move through it. But as a bee moves through that type of situation, those complicated environments, they're seeing at 250 hertz. And so to them, that really fast movement through the Clarkia flowers is actually just a nice, gentle flight in the park. They can make a lot of sense of where things are. They don't collide with obstacles. And if you want to know how I got this, it's because this is alongside my driveway, and I drove my car with a tripod holding my phone out the window. All right. So, um, so they can they can move really fast because it's really no big deal to them because their little brains can process speed like that. So because their little brains can process speed like that, if two bees went on a date to like a movie, um, like a human made movie at 24 frames a second or 60 frames a second, it would probably look a little like this. Yeah, which probably wouldn't be a whole lot of fun for a bee to watch. Okay. They just live in a faster world than us. All right, here's a photographic interlude of a longhorn bee, a Melistodes species, beautiful black longhorn bees. I love the dark longhorn bees. They always have these just gorgeous blue eyes. This species in particular just has radiant blue eyes. You can see them from like a mile away. All right, also, we're talking about flight. So the bee has got to stay level. All right, this is an image of a false horizon or an attitude indicator on an aircraft. If you've ever been in an aircraft cockpit, you've probably noticed it's probably the most prominent instrument that's there. Um, and it lets you know like which way's up, which way's down, if you're banking, if you're rolling, if you're climbing, if you're descending. Pretty handy, pretty intuitive little instrument. So how do humans know which way is up? Let's explore how we do it. We use our vision, gives us lots of clues, right? We can look outside a window and while we're flying an airplane, we could tell kind of what things are happening. We can tilt our heads and see the world tilt with it. Um, we also have this vestibular sense in our ears that helps us balance. And then proprioception is kind of a little known sense where we it's awareness of our body's own movement and the gravitational force on our own bones gives us a lot of information that maybe we don't realize we're getting. All right, so staying upright now is a time for a conversation about those simple eyes, the ocelli. So they're pronounced ocelli is pronounced well, it's ocelli, ocelli in the plural form, and ocellus in the singular form. So these are the three simple eyes on the top of the bee's head, and they maintain balance in level flight. And they also have this ability to notice changes in light. They're really kind of just light sensors. And when I say simple eye, it means because they only have one lens. It's not like those complex eyes that I believe have. I think that somebody once counted a honeybee's eye, and they have like 6,000 segments to them. And could you imagine that graduate assistant that day when they walked into the lab and somebody told them that was their job, counting all 6,000? Yeah. All right. I'm sure it took more than a day. But there's only three ocelli. They're easy to count. So the ocelli here, if we look up close to them, this is the forehead of a slender mason or a Protosmia rubiflorus, one of my absolute most favorite bees. And I may be the owner of the only managed population of these in the entire world, but who knows? They're a lot of fun to raise. Uh, these ocelli, this is a male, and if we look closely at these ocelli, uh, we notice there's a few things about them. Is that they're not all aimed in the same direction, and they're not even all round. They're sort of truncated on one end, as we could tell by that forward-facing ocelli. So the two back ones are aimed kind of like up and out, or temporally is how a doctor, or like an optometrist, would say. They're aimed up and temporally. Whereas the front lens is aimed up and forward. So there's the slender mason Protosmia rubiflorus female. And someday, that's my next presentation. I'm going to talk all about Protosmia rubiflorus. Um, they're the West Coast weird bee. Uh, so they cover a lot of ground with those eyes, two out, one forward. And those eyes act just like the attitude indicator in an aircraft. They sense light. So this would be an indicator of level flight in the ocelli, whereas this would be an indicator of a roll to the left. You see the Earth is coming up on the left side of each of the ocelli. This would be a roll to the right. Earth is coming up on the right side. This would be a dive. And since they're on the top of the head, a pure dive would still contain a whole lot of sky in it, because the bee at that point is orienting itself uh, perpendicular to the ground. And now the ocelli are so simple, they don't really have color receptors, at least nobody believes they have it. I don't think there's any definitive case on that. So they really just detect light. So I put the colors in there as a way to sort of represent the earth and the sky for everyone. But really, they just it's really no frills. It is an attitude indicator for an aircraft, and B are very sophisticated aircraft. You think about a B, and the amount of high techness that's going on there. Like I think a single cell on a B is more high tech than the most high tech fighter jet that humans have ever designed. I mean, our aircraft are so clumsy compared to the way a bee can fly. All right, so ocelli are kind of cool because kind of cool to check out too because there's some bees in the world that are nocturnal, which is really kind of probably strange to everybody. It's still strange to me, even though I've known this fact for years. I just want to see one someday. And here's one. This is from the USGS photos from the bee lab, and the this is Megalopta genelis. I believe they're a bee from Central America, and they just have humongous ocelli. And it's because they need to fly in the dark. And so that larger lens lets in more light. And the ability to know which way is up is really important, even if you're flying in the dark. Okay, the ocelli also do one more thing. They got another trick up their sleeves, and we're back to not black and white ocelli, but they also detect the polarized sky. So, what in the world is a polarized sky? That's a conversation about navigation. So bees use their eyes for navigation. So let's talk about what navigation requires. So as humans, we use visual memory, but we also require lots of tools to navigate. So we use GPS, maps, compass, knowledge of the stars, et cetera, et cetera. Um, I'm going to show a little video here, and I want you just to think about the complexity and the redundancy of any habitat a bee might live in. This is Kankakee Sands Prairie in Northwest Indiana. I'm a tall grass prairie boy, grew up in Illinois. Can't ever shake the silphiums out of my mind. Those are silphiums, by the way. It's a compass plant. Those are the prairie giants. Tall grass prairie is a wonderful place to see bees. Anyway, so I'll stop waxing poetically about the tall grass prairie. So they're able to navigate through that type of environment and memorize countless landmarks. They only have 1 million neurons in their little tiny brains. In fact, I made an actual size bee brain in the upper right next to my daughter Lillian's brain. I shrunk it down to be so tiny. And somehow they can navigate through that prairie. I mean, that prairie is like several square miles. If you've ever been to a prairie, go to Kankakee Sands Prairie. It's huge. Um, so they do that with 1 million neurons versus our 86 billion, and we need tools. How do they do that? I don't know. It's like one of the great mysteries of the world. All right. So I talked about how the ocelli pick up the polarized sky. And I want everyone to know here that I am not smoking anything. There really truly is this big circular arching band of black that runs through the sky at a 90-degree angle from the sun. We just can't see it. And it's actually a gradient. So closer to the sun is brighter in the sky. And then it reaches that 90-degree point and it's this dark band. So it looks something like this awful AI generated image where there's man standing in the middle of the sunflower field and it's sunset. And so it's easier for me to show the 90-degree change at sunset because the sun is lower. And then there's the band kind of stretching across the zenith of the sky. So bees can use this band and they can even calculate how much the band should move through the sky in the time that they're out. So, like somehow in that tiny, teeny brain, they have a clock. And also, kind of a neat thing about the polarized sky is it could be a cloudy day. And all you need is a little sliver of sky, and the bees can sense that gradient in the sliver and then calculate from there for navigation purposes. So it ends up being this really cool landmark in the sky. So how do you know where it is? This is the way to do it. Um, if you are standing somewhere on Earth, which probably are most of the time, you point to where the sun is with one arm, and then with the other arm, make a 90-degree angle with that other arm and uh, point up from the sun. And then you kind of rotate your shoulder a little bit to draw that circle that is the line of polarization. You can also get a polarized lens out and kind of glide it through the sky, and it'll actually turn dark at the point of that band of polarization. So that ends up being a really important navigation tool for bees. It's not going to be good for pinpoint navigation. Pinpoint navigation, of course, is going to require visual memory, but it's going to be good for that macro kind of, yeah, macro. I hesitate to use that word with this audience because macro usually means really tiny and close up in this world, but it means big picture everywhere else. So so yeah, there's the sky polarization. Neat thing. All right. Osmia, and so this is a picture of Osmia agalea, the male, one of the most beautiful bees in all of Washington State, maybe all of the world, especially the female. And the I wanted to show this picture to show that those eyes that are sensitive to polarized light, they're not just the ocelli, but it is also the upper part of the compound eye. And as you probably could deduce from this, is that the upper part is aimed at the sky. And so uh, those lenses are, or those eyes, compound eyes. I mean, we say bees have 5 eyes. They really probably have 12,003 eyes if it's 6,000 ommatidia per eye, right? So those upper eyes are sensitive to the polarized light. And the reason why is because their light receptors are all in line, picking up light in just one direction, and instead of being uh, in in all sorts of directions, which would prevent the eye from picking up polarized light. And that's kind of like what we have in our eyes. When the light gets into our eyes, it bounces around in all sorts of different directions, and so we can't detect the polarized light. So bees also need to find flowers. That's just like one of their great big things in life. They need to find flowers. So let's talk about finding flowers. And actually, I'm gonna have somebody who's made a big splash in native bee research and knowledge in Washington State, Don Rolfs. He's going to tell you about finding flowers. But just a little bit before that, I'll say that what do we do to find flowers? We use our central vision. Um, to find flowers for any creature, they need resolution or acuity or sharpness. They need color vision. Bees need ultraviolet sensitivity. And then we'll have Don tell you about the compound eyes. So here's Don Rolfs.
What about eyes? You got 2 of them. How many eyes does a native bee have? Well, let's take a look. We've got 2 big eyes here that we can see. If we take a little closer look, we see something special. What are these little funny, let's take a closer look. If we take a closer look at that, what we see is there's little hexagonal pieces, and if we took those apart with a microscopic view, we'd find that each one of those little hexagons was a lens with a separate nerve that goes to the optic nerve, so that each separate lens sees one thing, and if something moves in the field so that it goes to a different lens, it's a different nerve, and the bee says, "Whoa, something's moving," and it comes out of it. They're sensitive to motion at a level that you can't imagine.
Okay, so there's Don's pictures up close. There's his Epimelasodes obliqua, which he used for those images. It's a big hairy bee that lives in the Columbia Basin. And he was looking up close at those eyes, those 2 compound eyes on the side. Now, this is a dead bee. This is a specimen. Don's specimens are absolutely gorgeous with the spread wing and all that, as you can see. but unfortunately, the life kind of comes out of bee eyes when they're specimens. So it's always been kind of one of my aims in life to always photograph living bees so that we could see what it looks like when they have that spark of life in them. So here's those compound eyes. And here is a profile view of the compound eye. We look a little closer at it. We can see all the different facets. They're the ommatidia, as he was calling them. And they are, yes, they are called ommatidia. And he even made some sketches of them. Here's one ommatidia on the left, and there's the cornea, just like how we have. That's the objective lens, and the crystalline cone below that, and then the light receptors and the nerves. And when you stack them all together, it's quite an exciting thing to look at from a cross section. So this is an image of a mason bee of some type, possibly Osmia exigua, and a close-up of that compound eye, those really cool faint patterns and all that. So compound eyes, like in all of history, or all of history, like Hollywood, I guess, like us to believe that they look kind of like this, where the same image is repeated several times over and over again, and that's probably enough to drive any creature mad. But the concepts are right. However, what it probably looks like is more like pixelation. And so this is a simulation of pixelation of a flower that's blooming in my greenhouse right now. But before we get into the weeds with pixelation, we need to have a discussion about something called acuity. So acuity, what is acuity? You may recognize the Snellen eye chart on the right side with the big E on the top of it. It's what we use to measure acuity. So it's sharpness of an image from varying distances, and often it's measured at 20 feet for distance vision and 16 inches for near vision. 20/20 is considered normal vision in humans. That means what a normal person sees at 20 feet away, you can see with the same level of vision from 20 feet away. Now, if you are somebody who is legally blind in the United States, the highest amount of vision, the sharpest vision you could have as far as acuity goes, is 2200. So that means what somebody with 20/20 vision sees at 200 feet away, you would have to be 20 feet away to see with that same level of acuity. All right, so to understand acuity, I'm going to use a familiar scene in Washington State that a lot of people know about. This is a really poor image of Seattle Mariners Field. I don't even know what's called nowadays. It doesn't even look like it because, you know why? Because it was created by AI. But I didn't have access to any other pictures of batters standing at home plate at the Mariners game. And notice that straightaway center field, it says 400 on it. All right, it's 400 feet to the outfield wall from home plate. So let's do a fraction here. 20/20 vision. Well, first of all, before we do our fraction, let's say 20/20 vision, you see it nice and sharp. You can read the sign 400 feet away. But if you have 2200 vision, let's take that fraction and double it. So make it 4400, which is roughly the same thing as 2200. And now if you're standing at home plate and you have 2200 vision, which is the highest level of vision for legal blindness, you can still see quite a bit. You can still see there's a batter there. You can still see the batter's wearing a belt. There's text on his shirt. He's swinging a bat. But you can't see that 400 sign clearly at all. You would have to then move up to 40 feet away from that 400 sign then to see it with the same level of acuity as that batter with 20/20 vision sees it. Okay, so this is important. Bees are what they call really nearsighted, but I don't even know if that's really a fair way to talk about it. They see things, so things that are about 1.9 degrees in their visual field are things that they begin to resolve detail on. And what does that mean? That means that things that are about 10 to 6 inches away from them. So here I have a ruler, a 6-inch ruler with a Phacelia hastata flower. If you don't plant Phacelia hastata in your bee garden, you should plant Phacelia hastata in your bee garden. But that's not the point of this slide. So there's the bee looking at that Phacelia hostata. It's starting to pick up image or detail from it. Now, bees have a fixed focus lens. So they aren't like our lenses where we could look at something really close and then look at something really far away. And almost instantaneously, our vision snaps into focus for both those elements, no matter how far away they are. Bees have just one focus point. But since all of those little lenses, those little ommatidia in the complex eye are so tiny, and if you're a photographer, you know that when you clamp down on your aperture, that makes the opening into the camera sensor extremely small and then improves what's called your depth of field. That's the width of the of the amount that's in focus. So bees, because of those small lenses, have a very large depth of field. So they can actually see a lot from each ommatidia that's in focus from a lot of distances. And so although humans could see roughly 100 more times detail than bees, think about this. And I put a human on this ruler because what if we were the size of bees? 20 feet away from that Phacelia hostata is roughly like 2 inches away on that ruler. And so we're seeing something 20 feet away with that 20/20 acuity. Okay, we're seeing all that detail. Bees start to see detail from 6 inches away, which relatively, if we were all the same size, is actually a greater distance. So I don't know. Been trying to crack the code on that one. Think about that one for a little bit. Still, bees don't see as sharp as we do. Get an idea of what you could do with unsharp vision. Let's watch this video. This is my greenhouse. There's a lot of stuff outside of my greenhouse. It's a very busy time of year for my greenhouse. And I'm walking in, my vision's very blurred, but I can still see. Oh, I want to find that terracotta pot. Okay, not too much of a problem. Could walk into that greenhouse, find that terracotta pot with vision that's simulated to be roughly legal blindness. Okay, so if I've got bee vision and it's pixelated, okay, I walk into that greenhouse and yeah, it's pixelated. Looks like I'm playing a video game, but that terracotta pot still pretty easy to notice. I don't run into obstacles. I don't trip over anything. I could tell a path on the ground. Okay, so actually you could do quite a bit with what's considered low acuity, especially when it comes to traveling on your feet or on your wings. Now you're not going to drive a car with acuity like that, but doesn't mean that you can't get around. We're talking about finding flowers. So this would be that same situation in my greenhouse. I'm looking at flowers. Those are Monk's aster. And I'm flying like a bee with my camera, actually, side by side. And as I get closer to that aster, it resolves the details. So that side-to-side flight in a bee is something that we see quite a bit. If you've ever watched a bee examine anything small, there's a very side-to-side flighty thing about them. They rock back and forth like a seesaw. And so here's bee trying to find her whole blue orchard mason bee. And do you notice that? How she banked to the right, banked to the left before settling her feet down. And that's the reason. The reason for that is because not only do they have that pixelated vision, which isn't as sharp as ours, but they also have this blind spot right in the center. Now, a bee's head has the eyes far apart, and anything really close to that's just not going to conjoin because the ommatidia aren't focused really to join at those close distances. So bees are flying back and forth as a way to do what I call, this is probably not a technical term, I call it visual scrubbing. But that movement allows it to fill in the blanks of what's in that blind spot. can see with one eye and the other eye and one eye and the other eye, and then it's kind of put together a complete picture. And who knows what's happening in that little bee brain, because it's probably resolving that blind spot in a way just by that motion. All right, so color vision. So to find flowers, bees need color vision. And this is kind of cool in bees. So color vision follows a spectrum all the way from infrared to ultraviolet. And in the middle of that, there's the visible spectrum. And we call it the visible spectrum because it's what we can see, because we're the ones who named the spectrum, basically the colors of the rainbow. And bees, they see in the visible spectrum as well, and quite a bit of it, everything except for red, really. And then they see above that an ultraviolet spectrum, which who knows really what those colors are. Bee purple is kind of what we say is in the ultraviolet spectrum. I imagine it's a fairly vibrant world there, but unfortunately we don't have access. So it's kind of sad that bees don't have access to red, because there's this beautiful garden at Snoqualmie Pass that I'm sure bees would love to visit and appreciate just as much as I do, and actually they do. But it has a lot of red poppies in it and a lot of red blanket flowers. And if I took out the reds, well, hell, it's still exciting. I mean, however, I like the reds. Yeah, the reds were nice, but no, that's not too bad. I mean, heck, I just want to fight bees. But I'm going to guess that that's not so bland to a bee's eye because it's got the ultraviolet sensitivity. Maybe there's things in those flowers that we can't see. And so there are some flowers that I found. I don't unfortunately have the ability to photograph in an ultraviolet-y sort of way. So I got these off of Wikimedia Commons. This is a strawberry flower, and to our eyes, it's got little white petals and it's got the yellow center. But if we're looking at it under ultraviolet light, those petals come alive with all sorts of markings, and those are nectar guides to guide the bee to the prize. And the prize is usually colored in bee purple. It gets really dark in the middle. So that yellow is actually got a lot of ultraviolet light going on. And so the bees see that bee purple, and then that is what leads them to the reward, which is the nectar. Okay, so here's an example of another very familiar flower, the black-eyed Susan. And on the left, there's no ultraviolet light, and then it's kind of half and half. And then there's the full image where we see that there's a lot of darkness towards the reproductive parts of the flower as a nectar guide. So ultraviolet light is kind of fascinating. I would love to explore that photographically someday. Could unlock all sorts of exciting garden mysteries. All right, a brief interlude of a bee with beautiful eyes. This is Epiolus. And they don't just have beautiful eyes, but they have beautiful antennae too. And I don't know if anyone's ever noticed that of the scape, that's this part that holds the antennae in place, or the antennal socket, and maybe it's called, is green. It's lime green in this bee. I think that's pretty cool. All right, so bees also have to stay safe and aware if they want to stay alive. And all creatures in the world, except for maybe orcas, have to stay safe and aware to some extent. This requires, in bees at least, a panoramic visual field and sensitivity to motion. So what is visual field? Let's talk about what it's like with us. So as humans, we see from about 200 to 220 degrees horizontal. So if you were to take your hands out totally to your sides, to your ends of your peripheries, and wiggle your hands like jazz hands, or whatever they call those, spirit hands, you'd be able to see them out of the edge of your vision. You wouldn't be able to see them very sharp. It would be blurry. You wouldn't be able to tell any detail in that peripheral vision, but you'd still be able to see them. All right, up and down, our vertical visual field is about 135 degrees. We see a little bit better down than we do up. That makes sense because we need to see what's in front of our feet. All right, bees, well, they got a whole lot more to worry about. They got willow flycatchers to worry about, folks. I don't know if you've ever seen a willow flycatcher. It's a bird. They just sit right up there waiting to kill bees. And they tell you all about it all day long. They have the greatest little song. Sounds like root beer or something like root beer. 280 degrees is a bee's visual field. They got to see all sorts of stuff. And their vertical visual field, I'm sorry, horizontal visual field is 280 degrees. And actually, we go back to that slide. You notice how I took that central area out in between its eyes, a little cone there. All right, so the vertical visual field, 150 to 180 degrees, they are kind of like the reverse of us. They see better up than down, but not all the way around like behind them, that like the horizontal field talks about. So how does this work in the real world? Welcome back to my greenhouse. Great place to talk about visual fields because there's a frame on the greenhouse like a World War II bomber nose, and you can gauge distances and all that. Now it's a 12-foot by 8-foot greenhouse, so I pardon the real estate photography here. It makes it look like it's absolutely cavernous, but I'm using the wide-angle lens to show that humans have a 200-degree field of view. So I'm stepping 1 foot into the greenhouse and off to my side, off to my shoulder sides. That's where the cutoff is in this image. Now, that's still quite a bit. Now, you'll only really see sharp in your central field of view, and it's only just an absolute tiny bit, not even the size of a penny. And then your vision fades out to the sides, preferably. So if you're a bee, then I have to use some trick photography here because it's a two-dimensional image, two-dimensional presentation. But you see behind you to an extent. So if I'm a bee standing in the same spot that I was standing walking into my greenhouse, I could see like out the door behind me to either side, see some of the detail. You get a little peek into my garden there. There's my red barn on the side, hiding there. All right. Hopefully you all get a time to visit my garden and take pictures of bees with me. Bring home a plant or two. All right, vertical visual field for a bee is 150 to 180 degrees, so the bees are going to see up considerably, whereas a human, I have a human on the right there, and it gives you the yellow line, which shows you just about the extent of what we would see with our vision walking in there. So very similar visual fields to the lower end. Okay, so that's visual fields, and that's awareness. You got to be able to see around you so you can avoid those willow flycatchers that'll jump out at you in an instant. All right, so this now is about motion. Bees are going to need to see motion, and you're going to need to see motion in a really intense way. Now, if we talk about motion, we have wide angle vision as humans, and we could see motion from one side of a visual field to another side of a visual field, and it's not all that hard to track. There's this moving ball. And if you notice that telescope on the top, that's because it's relative. It's related to what we're going to talk about with motion. But if we go to restrict our visual field, like a bee restricts theirs in each one of the tiny, tiny lenses of the ommatidia, then we're going to see motion in a very different way. You catch that? How about that? How about that? Motion's very sudden and unexpected. So people with tunnel vision, they don't have that peripheral field. So like things move really fast through their visual field. And so reacting to it is tough. Okay, so imagine that. And so this is precisely why I have the telescope up there, because the reason why we put a telescope onto a tripod to move it, aim it, and keep it steady is because it has such a narrow field of view. It has so much magnification that within that little tiny field, even like the slightest breeze of wind touching it would probably make it shake a little bit. So we got to keep it as steady as we can. If it was a wide angle lens, you probably don't even need an image stabilizer on it. You could handhold it, still show up really sharp. Okay, now imagine that ball, that movement going across the whole width of the ommatidia. Each one of those lenses aimed in a slightly different direction is picking up motion in a way that, as Don Rolfe said, I think he said in a way that we cannot fathom. So if you're wondering about that bee, what that is, that's that Epiolus that I showed you that picture of. I just love the eyes of Epiolus. I think they would maybe win an eye pageant in the Washington State Eye Pageant for bees. Yeah. All right. And then I'm going to leave you with, or I'm going to show you Don one more time here, because he's got a very important message for all of us with bees.
There's 8 species of bees in Washington that have a problem. Anybody ever have an eyelash in your eye? Drive you nuts. But if you were one of those 8 species of bees, you'd have hair growing out of your eyes. Hair growing out of their eyes. There's 8 species in Washington like that. I don't know what that's about. Some people say that it's an airspeed indicator that the bees use. I don't know.
All right. So bees have hair growing out of their eyes. There's 8 species of bees in Washington. This is probably the most well known of those 8 species of bees is the European honeybee. Look at all that hair coming out of their eyes. That's pretty funny the way Don puts it. Oh, if you ever get an eyelash in your eye. Yeah, it's a little bit of a mystery. Why do some bees have it? Or very few bees have it? Why do some bees not have it? The native bee that's got it in Washington State is the sharp-tailed bee, Coleoxys ruffitarsus. They're a cuckoo bee of large leafcutter bees. They have absolutely stunning green eyes. And here's a sharp-tailed bee with a much warmer colored set of hair on that same species. Look at all that hair in its eye. All right. So anyways, I hope you gained some insight from it, no pun intended. That's a little bit about bee vision.
Thank you so much, Joe. I really appreciate you sticking it through all of the technical challenges we've had this evening. And I found your talk really, really interesting. I'd love if anybody had questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. But why do bees have dark spots in some parts of their eyes? Some species even have one extra dark area in each eye that makes it look like they have a pupil.
Yeah, nice. Well, yeah, that's probably something I should have covered there. Those patterns are just really beautiful areas of pigment on the bee's eyes, and I have not been able to find information on anyone who's cracked the code on why some bee eyes are patterned versus others. That really dark area that looks like a pupil, that's actually called a pseudopupil. And that's part of the form of the compound eye. So imagine if you're looking at a whole bunch of tubes from the top, like a whole box of tubes, and they're all facing upward. When you look, whatever tubes you're looking at, you're hovering over, you're going to look straight down into, and it's going to be darker than the tubes that are off to the sides. So if this tube is off to the side of your vision, you're going to see the edge of the inside of the tube.
Gotcha.
So yeah, that pseudopupil also probably it also seems like it has a knockoff purpose for making any creature observing it thinking that they're being looked at. Yeah.
Um, do the hairs in bees' compound eyes grow from the ommatidia or from between them?
From between them, actually. Yeah, I don't know if you could tell in my photos, but yeah, they grow in random places in between. I'm probably not going to try to share because I don't want another technical issue knocking me off.
Yeah, no
But
worries.
yeah, I did take an ultra close-up photo of a part of it. It wasn't a photo that I thought had the quality to end up in any sort of presentation, but I wanted to crack that code. And yeah, there's no pattern to where they emerge from. They just emerge here, there, and everywhere. Sometimes at the intersection of the hexagonal ommatidia, and sometimes in alongside one of the flat edges. It's a little boggling.
Huh. I'm going to
Yeah,
jump
thanks, Tony.
into the next question here. Do smaller bees have fewer ommatidia in than big bees?
So the number of ommatidia on bee eyes, I've only been able to find data on honeybee eyes. Makes sense, right? Um, However, when I look at like a Perdido's eyes, a fairy bee's eyes, the one that I mentioned in the beginning is like its head's not even a millimeter long. It does appear to me like there's a significantly lower amount of ommatidia
Hmm.
in those complex eyes. Um, so maybe there's a limit to just how small ommatidia can be, at a point where they're still efficient and can collect enough light for the creature to be able to find them useful.
Mark asks, what kind of lens did you use to capture the bee eyes? How are you able to photograph eyes with so much clarity on live bees?
Yeah. Well, thanks. Yeah. The lens or the camera that I use, I can actually set it up here just in case I needed to show it off so that everyone can see this. And it's a Lumix G9 too, which is a micro four thirds size sensor, so a really tiny sensor. Puts lots of pixels on really tiny pieces of image. And this is a Laowa microscopic lens. And this is a 10x Laowa microscopic lens. So it actually ends up being 20x with the micro four thirds lens. 20x really is a misnomer. It's just a really close focusing lens. Anytime you see X on a lens, it's like it doesn't mean anything really. It's millimeters that would actually have meaning. So I use this flash with it along with my paper towel diffuser,
I
and it's
love it.
mounted on a tripod with lots of gears and other things that are meant to provide me with the ability to articulate it in very tiny ways. The bees that I use are cold, but they're not refrigerator cold. They have slept overnight cold. So they sit on uh, a marble board. Lisa invented this method. Sit on a marble board that's got a piece of ice under it, and they stay cold for a good amount of time, so that anesthetizes them. And and I take their picture. Each picture takes roughly 15 to 20 minutes to just take it. Um, and it's really intense because I have to like kneel down on the ground and look sideways through my viewfinder and all that. I'd love to find a way to elevate my setup, but yeah, it's tough. I really have to like stretch afterwards for each one. And then if you get like one photo off in that whole 20-minute segment, you got to start over again from scratch. But the bees, some bees will stay still. I can even take bees out in the field on a hot day and put them on Lisa's idea with the marble and the ice under them, and that just anesthetizes them sometimes to keep them still enough in the middle of the afternoon, this summer afternoon. Yeah.
Love it. One more question from Lisa again. The Epiolus looked like the Ommatidia have topography, not smooth like a ball? Question mark?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for noticing that, Lisa. Yeah, there's topography on bee eyes. They look like they're just going to be these smooth egg shaped, perfectly egg shaped surfaces. But there's definitely a lot of bees have like a swell in their central vision. Their central vision is actually the sharpest part of their vision, and makes sense, because that's what they use to find flowers and find their nests and all. And so that often bulges out in some way. Also, the seams of the hexagons don't always fit so perfectly patterned. You'd see that sometimes they have this beautiful long line of hexagons that are all in order, then suddenly they take another direction. And that's probably a way to fit the hexagons efficiently onto that relief of their eyes, the surface of their eyes that's not totally flat. But yeah, different parts of the complex eyes are for different reasons, and the complex eyes take on not just and take on a fairly complex form along with their complex amount of eyes.
That's super interesting. I really appreciate you taking the time, Joe, and sticking it through for all of these issues. It was awesome to have you, Joe, and I really appreciate you all sticking it out. And we will see you again in January. Watch out for that email. Thanks again, everyone, and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks again, everyone. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Take care.